Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be thinking about how to harmonise a descending bass line, just coming down a scale in the bass if you like. Now at one level you might think, well, what's so awkward about that? At another level, you might have been there with this and discovered that it can be a little bit awkward. It's one thing harmonizing a scale, whether you're going up or down, when the scale is at the top of your texture. It's a slightly different thing when the scale's at the bottom. And one thing you realise when you're doing that is, apart from trying to harmonise a scale that's happening at the bottom, you've also got to think differently when you come down to the way in which you go up, because the voice leading is different. For example, when I'm coming up that scale in the bass, I get to the seventh note. Well, that B leads on to a C. So I might decide I'm going to use a dominant seventh with that B. So say we use a dominant seventh in its first inversion. The B needs to rise to the C. However, when I come down, if I start with a C and then I use a dominant seventh with a B, well, the B is not now rising up to C, but it's going down to A. And it sort of works, but it's not nearly as good, because really the voice leading in the bass is wrong. The third should be going up when you resolve a dominant seventh. So when you're going up, that third rises to C, but when you're going down, the third doesn't rise, it falls to A. So you see what I mean? The voice leading actually changes between a scale that's going up and a scale that's going down, particularly when you're doing this in the bass. Now, what some people have discovered is that if you go down a scale of C major, then perhaps the easiest thing to do is just to go down in root position chords. Well, it doesn't sound that great unless you're looking for a particular effect. And of course, the trouble is you very easily end up with parallel fifths, consecutive fifths. And if you're going to go into four parts, you'll probably end up with parallel or consecutive octaves as well. So actually, it doesn't go too well if you do that. What I'm trying to show you here is a very simple way for avoiding those parallels and end up with some harmony that will work. It's very basic, but it's a nice simple trick to have. And it involves alternating a root position chord with a first inversion chord. So if we have a look at what I've done here, I've got this C major scale running in the bass. And what I'm doing here is using a root position chord for every other chord. There's one there, but there isn't one there. Then I'm using a first inversion at these points. It's just switching round at the end. So just to be clear about that, root at the beginning of that bar, root there, root there. But in the last bar, switching them round so you get the root there. Then alternating that with a first inversion chord there, 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 and then switching them round in the last bar to finish. Okay, so effectively it's alternating 5, 6, 5, 6, 5, 6, and then at the end it's going 6, 5, just to kind of confuse you a little bit, but it's just how it finishes. Now, if we then work out, well, what does that mean for chords? It means, if we're in C major, obviously, we end up with chord 1 there. Then we use 5 in first inversion, so 5B, or you might know it as 5, 6. Then we can use a chord 6, which takes us on to a 3 in first inversion. And then we have a 4, takes us on to a 1 in first inversion. And then we flick it around, so we get a 7 in first inversion, followed by a 1. Okay, now what's the purpose of doing that? Well, if we alternate a root position chord with a first inversion chord, we're not going to end up in trouble with these parallel fifths or parallel octaves. and the alternation makes it sound rather better than just coming down with a whole load of root position chords. So what we've got now is this: 1, 5 first inversion, 6, 3 first inversion, 4, 1 first inversion, 7 first inversion, 1. Okay, so I should have called that 7B. There we go. All right, so you see how that actually works. So we get a very basic pattern. You've also got a kind of sequential pattern elsewhere. You know, I end up with a common note between these first two chords, which is useful. So G, G, and then it happens again. E, E, then it happens again. C, C, and then it just changes at the end to go B, C to finish off. Okay, so that gives us potential to do things. It also means that one part can just track down the scale in parallel with the bass. You notice that middle part is just doing this. So that kind of harmonizes quite nicely as well. So this is all because you're just literally alternating a root with the first inversion chord. And what I've done in the pair of staves below is to say, well, of course you could turn the upper parts upside down. So this part is doing what the top part was doing before, and this part is doing what the middle part was doing before. So in the alternative version, it sounds like this. Now you may prefer that because you can now hear that descending scale at the top running in thirds, in compound thirds in this case, with the bass. So you could do it either way. Now, of course, it sounds a little bit bland just done like this, but it's not a bad idea when you want to do something like this to plan how it's going to work. So you've got your scale written. In this case, it happens to pan out over a 4-bar phrase, a 4-measure phrase, which could be quite useful in a composition you might be writing. But you want to get your harmony in place first before you start thinking about elaborating it. Lots of people, when they're doing this kind of stuff, write all sorts of 8th notes and 16th notes, you know, quavers and semi-quavers all over the place without really being sure what the underlying harmony is. So get your harmony lined up and then you can work out how to elaborate it. So, for example, if I'm looking at the first illustration here, instead of just having these rather plain chords, I could do something very simple like this. Okay, I could elaborate that a bit further. Do something like that. You know, things you can do. Or you could take the middle part. Or you could do something with the bass part. So you can see that there are possibilities that suddenly transform that from just being a kind of rather theoretical sequence of chords to something that's got a bit more melodic interest. And obviously in the second version, we can do the same thing. All I'm doing is using auxiliary notes or neighbor tones, or I'm using passing notes or passing tones. So, for example, if we look at this top part, I may decide to elaborate it by going something like this. So we just sort of do a little bit, something like this. Okay, so you see what I'm doing at this point. I'm using that harmony note, that chord tone. I'm using an upper auxiliary note or an upper neighbor tone, and then I'm using an accented passing note or an accented passing tone because that's happening on a beat and I'm going on to the harmony note or the chord tone at that point. So I get something like this. And suddenly we've got something quite interesting going at the top. You could liven it up with a bit of rhythm. Suddenly it's sounding a bit more musical, isn't it? I've got a bit more melodic interest coming out of it. But you see what's happening? I don't end up with notes in the melody that don't really belong to the chords, because I've got my chords sorted out first, and then I've thought, how can I embellish these chords by using these inessential notes in a way that works nicely? You could run something parallel with a bass. Sounding very nice, isn't it? So just ways in which you can harmonize a descending scale in the bass, so you're not left thinking, oh, I've got parallels all over the place and can't quite get out of those, by alternating a root position with a first inversion, and then using a common note or a common tone in this situation between the two chords, and then sort of elaborating it in some way in any of the parts that you want to do that in, or any combination of the parts, or exchange between one part and another part to turn it into something that sounds a bit more melodic, a little bit more musical. So it's a very simple idea if you want to harmonize a descending scale in the bass line. Well, if you found that helpful, you might like to go to the Music Matters website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. And if you're interested in further engagement with us, then have a look at Maestros. Maestros is our international musical community, and it draws people together from all over the world, and it's a fabulous opportunity to interact with others. Level 1, nothing to do with ability, but all levels of engagement. So level 1 is a kind of support level. You get early access to videos, you get fun things like emojis and so on. Level 2 brings many more benefits, and you have the level 1 benefits as well. But level 2 includes access to a monthly live stream where I teach for a solid hour on topics that people in the group have asked me to deliver the teaching on. So you can choose the topics. We run a live chat so you can ask questions, make comments, interact with other people in the group. Fantastic opportunity to be together for that hour each month. You can go up to level 3 if you want a deeper level of engagement. All the benefits of level 1 and level 2 are yours, but with level 3, you also have additional benefits like discounts on all of our courses, an additional live stream, which is much more tailor-made to the individual, because you can submit your own work, be it recordings of performances that you want to put together, be it your own compositions, harmony exercises, anything you want to submit, and you'll get one-to-one feedback from me, and we'll share all this in the group so we can all learn from each other, and other people will make encouraging comments as well. The folk who join that actually really enjoy the engagement with other people. They tell me they find the feedback really useful, and they learn so much from what other people are doing as well. So Maestros might be just the thing that you're looking for. www.mmcourses.co.uk